He stood only a few feet away. But there was no spark of recognition in the old dog's eyes. Jake Wheeler had survived worse moments. He had survived firefights that lasted hours, sandstorms that blinded entire platoons, and nights so cold the ground itself seemed to groan under their bodies. He had survived the loss of friends, the endless ache of a fractured body, and the invisible wounds that followed him home. But nothing had prepared him for this. The dog before him, old now, graying around the muzzle, slower in movement, stood at the end of the leash like a stranger. His name was Max. A Belgian Malinois, once sharp as a blade and fast as a bullet. Once Jake's shadow in battle. Now, just a tired dog staring blankly at a man he should have known. Jake clenched his hands into fists to keep them from trembling. He didn't know what he expected. He hadn't seen Max in almost 7 years. After Jake's injury, he had been flown home and Max had stayed behind with another handler until retirement. Adoption paperwork, long waiting lists, government red tape. Jake fought through it all when he heard Max was finally free to find a new home. He fought for this moment. For a reunion he had played 100 times in his head. He had imagined Max charging across the room, knocking him over, licking his face, tail whipping like a storm. Instead, Max stood still. No tail wag. No perked ears. Just a slow, polite glance. Jake swallowed hard. The trainer, a kind-faced woman in a navy blue jacket, crouched beside Max and scratched his neck. "Sometimes it happens," she said softly. "After all they've seen, after all they've endured, sometimes they protect themselves by forgetting." Jake nodded numbly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even heartbroken, not exactly. He was something else. Something deeper. A hollow space opening in his chest where hope used to be. He knelt carefully, wincing as his knee protested. His bad leg, still half metal from the surgery overseas, didn't like the cold concrete floor of the Veterans Center's meeting room. Max watched him. Head slightly tilted. A flicker of curiosity maybe, but no more. Jake lowered himself until he was eye level with the dog. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. His voice cracked. Max blinked slowly. "Nothing." Jake smiled sadly. "That's okay," he said, reaching slowly, letting Max sniff his hand. "You don't have to remember. I remember enough for both of us." Max sniffed politely, then looked away, his attention wandering toward the open doorway where sunlight spilled across the floor. The trainer shifted awkwardly. "We can give you more time if you want. Some days it takes a while, eh?" Jake shook his head. He didn't want to force it. Love was never something you demanded. It was something freely given or not at all. He rose slowly, biting back the wince. Could I just sit with him a while?" Jake asked. The trainer smiled. "Of course." They left him alone in the room with Max. Jake sat back down on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching the dog he had once trusted with his life explore the room with the slow, cautious steps of an old soldier. 7 years. Jake let his mind wander back. The last time he had seen Max, there had been gunfire in the air and blood on the sand. Jake had gone down hard, the pain in his side so blinding he thought he wouldn't survive the night. Max had stood over him, barking like a demon, holding off enemy soldiers until reinforcements arrived. He had saved Jake's life. Twice. 3 times if Jake was honest. Once from an ambush. Once from himself. And now Jake exhaled, long and slow. Now it was Jake's turn to save him. Even if Max didn't remember. Even if the bond they had built had eroded under the weight of years and distance. Jake dug into his jacket pocket, fingers brushing against worn fabric. He pulled out a small object, a torn piece of canvas. An old army patch. It was faded, frayed at the edges, barely recognizable. But to Jake, it meant everything. He tossed it gently onto the floor a few feet away from him. The small slap of fabric against concrete made Max's ears twitch. The dog turned, sniffed, hesitated, and then he approached. Slowly, step by careful step. Jake held his breath. Max lowered his head, nose working furiously. He sniffed the patch. Paused. Sniffed again. Something flickered across his face. Something deep. Buried. A shadow moving across old waters. Jake didn't dare move. He just watched. Waited. Max sniffed the patch again. Then lifted his head. And looked straight into Jake's eyes. For a moment, just a moment, it was like a door swinging open. Recognition flared. Sharp and bright. Max's tail gave a single tentative wag. Jake blinked back, the sudden sting in his eyes. "Hey, boy," he whispered. And then, without warning, Max surged forward. He crashed into Jake's chest with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. Whining, barking, wriggling, pushing his head under Jake's chin, tail now wagging so hard it thudded against the wall. Jake laughed. A broken, joyous sound. He wrapped his arms around the dog and held him close, burying his face in Max's fur, breathing in the familiar, dusty scent. "You remember," he choked out. "You remember." And in that moment, the lost years didn't matter. The distance didn't matter. The scars didn't matter. All that mattered was that somewhere, deep inside the old warrior's heart, Max had never forgotten. Jake didn't let go. Not for a long time. Max pressed his weight against him with a kind of desperate insistence, as if trying to make up for every day they had lost. His paws scrabbled against Jake's chest, and he whined softly, a sound Jake hadn't heard since the dusty days overseas. Jake tightened his arms around the dog's shoulders, feeling the rise and fall of Max's breathing, the powerful thud of his heart against his ribs. "I missed you, buddy," Jake whispered into the thick fur. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a recovery. Piece by piece, the parts of him that had been broken and buried began stitching themselves back together. When Jake finally leaned back, Max sat in front of him, tail sweeping the floor, tongue lolling in a sloppy, joyful grin. The years had softened him, slowed him, but inside those familiar eyes, brown and deep and steady, Jake saw the same fierce spirit. The trainer re-entered the room quietly. Jake wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed for a second, but the trainer just smiled. "He knows now," she said softly. Jake nodded, voice thick. "Yeah, he knows." The paperwork was waiting. Signatures, formalities, documents affirming that Max would now officially belong to Jake. Jake signed them without hesitation, hands firm despite the slight tremble he still couldn't quite control. As he scratched his name across the last line, he felt something lift inside him, like setting down a burden he didn't realize he had been carrying for years. Max nudged his hand once the pen was down, and Jake laughed. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." They left the center together. No ceremony. No cameras. Just an old soldier and an older dog walking side by side into the fresh air. Jake opened the passenger door of his battered pickup truck and patted the seat. "Hop in, big guy." Max hesitated only a second before scrambling up. His movements were a little stiff, but the determination was the same. Jake slid behind the wheel, and for a moment they just sat there, soaking it in. Outside the windows, life went on. People hurried down sidewalks. Cars zipped past. The world didn't know, or maybe didn't care, that something sacred had just been restored. Jake didn't need them to know. He reached over and ruffled Max's ears. "We're gonna be all right now," he said. He meant it. For the first time in a long time, he actually believed it. The drive home was slow. Jake took the scenic route, longer roads through stretches of open fields and winding hills. He rolled the windows down so Max could stick his nose out, catching the scents of wild grass and distant water. Jake glanced over more than once. Max's head was up. His eyes were bright. He looked alive. Not just surviving. Living. At a red light, Jake found himself talking. Telling Max about the new place, small but with a big backyard. About the old armchair he never sat in anymore but would gladly surrender. About the town, quiet, friendly, the kind of place where nobody stared too long or asked too many questions. Max listened, head tilted slightly, as if absorbing every word. Jake smiled. They pulled into the driveway just as the sun was starting to dip, casting a golden glow over the faded paint of the house and the tall oak tree in the yard. Jake killed the engine and turned. "You're home," he said. Max's tail thumped once against the seat. Inside, Jake let Max explore. The dog sniffed every corner, padded through every room, circled the living room twice before finally settling with a heavy sigh by the fireplace. Jake dropped his duffel bag by the door and sat down on the couch, just watching. He didn't want to rush anything. Didn't want to make it something it wasn't. If Max wanted to be near him, he would come. If not, that was okay too. He owed the dog that freedom. Minutes passed. The light outside faded into the soft gray of twilight. And then, without a sound, Max rose, crossed the room, and laid his head on Jake's knee. Jake froze. The weight of it. The quiet trust. He reached down, threading his fingers through Max's fur, feeling the warmth of him, the solid realness. Tears burned his eyes again, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Because this wasn't grief. It wasn't loss. It was something else. Something rare. A bridge built across years and silence and pain. A bridge that had held. Jake leaned back against the couch and let his eyes drift shut, one hand resting on Max's head. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he didn't feel alone. The world could rage outside. The years could come and go. The scars could throb and the memories could sting. But here, now in the quiet heart of his home, he was whole again. Because sometimes love doesn't forget. It just waits for the right moment to come home. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about healing ever was. Max had bad nights. Sometimes he paced the house at 2 in the morning, restless and confused, nose pressed against the windows as if searching for something he couldn't name. Other nights he whimpered in his sleep, paws twitching, caught in dreams from a world both he and Jake had tried to leave behind. Jake understood. He had those nights too. So when Max paced, Jake sat with him. When Max whined in his sleep, Jake would kneel beside him, resting a hand on his side until the nightmares faded. They didn't fix each other. They just stayed. And somehow that was enough. The first time Max barked again, really barked, sharp and loud and full of life, it startled Jake so much he dropped his coffee mug. Max was standing at the back door, tail wagging furiously, barking at a squirrel that had dared to trespass into the yard. Jake laughed so hard his ribs hurt. Max turned, looking confused for a moment, then barked again, as if proud of himself. Jake knelt and hugged him tightly. "That's more like it," he whispered. Spring edged into summer. The oak tree in the yard bloomed thick and green, its branches stretching like arms into the blue sky. Jake built a ramp off the porch to make it easier for Max to come and go. He bought a second-hand pickup truck with lower steps so Max could ride with him again without struggling. They went everywhere together. The hardware store. The farmer's market. The park by the river where Max would sniff every tree and inspect every bench like he was still on patrol. People noticed them. The old soldier with the older dog. They didn't ask too many questions. Jake appreciated that. He didn't need anyone's pity. Just a little space. And maybe a nod from someone who understood. Max loved riding in the truck. He would sit in the passenger seat, ears flapping in the wind, tongue hanging out, looking for all the world like he was finally at peace. Jake often caught himself watching him at red lights, smiling without meaning to. It was hard not to. There was something about Max's presence that made the air feel lighter, the road feel shorter, the world seem a little less broken. They developed small rituals. Morning walks to the mailbox. Evening patrols around the yard. Sunday afternoons napping side by side in the living room while old westerns played on mute in the background. Jake didn't realize how much these moments meant until one evening, sitting on the porch as the sun slipped behind the trees, Max rested his head on Jake's foot and let out a deep, contented sigh. And Jake felt it. A weight lifting. A knot loosening. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Max had given him that gift once, long ago, in a place of dust and blood. And now he was giving it to him again. In the quiet. In the peace. In the simple, stubborn act of staying. One morning, Jake woke to find Max already standing at the front door, tail wagging, ready for their usual drive. Jake chuckled and grabbed his keys. "All right, boss," he said. "You lead the way." They drove out past the town, down winding country roads lined with wildflowers and sagging fences. Jake had no destination in mind. Sometimes it was just about the ride. About the space between one place and another. About moving forward even if you didn't know exactly where you were going. They stopped at a field where tall grass swayed in the breeze and the scent of clover filled the air. Jake spread an old blanket on the ground and sat down. Max lay beside him, head resting on Jake's knee, eyes half closed in the sun. Jake pulled out a worn leather-bound journal from his bag. It was something he had started keeping after therapy sessions back when he first came home, a place to write the things he couldn't say out loud. He flipped it open to a blank page. And for the first time, he didn't write about nightmares. Or pain. Or loss. He wrote about Max. About the way the dog's ears perked when he heard a can opener. About the way he still, even after all these years, instinctively positioned himself between Jake and the door in any room they entered. About the way he had remembered when it mattered most. Jake wrote until the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the field. When he finished, he set the pen down and leaned back, staring at the endless stretch of blue above them. Max shifted closer, his body warm and solid against Jake's side. "You did good, buddy," Jake said softly. "You did real good." Max thumped his tail once against the blanket. It wasn't the kind of ending Jake would have imagined years ago. Not medals. Not parades. Not speeches. Just this. Quiet. Steady. Real. And somehow it was exactly what he needed. Because the greatest victories aren't the ones marked by noise. They're the ones found in silence. In loyalty that refuses to fade. In a love that, even after years of separation, even after battles lost and won, still finds its way home. The first signs of change were small. Max still rose eagerly every morning, but his steps grew slower. Still wagging his tail, still following Jake around the house, but with a heaviness that hadn't been there before. Jake noticed. Of course he noticed. He pretended not to at first, offering shorter walks, longer naps, a few extra treats here and there. Pretended it was just a long winter shaking loose from Max's bones. But some things you can't pretend away. One evening, after a long drive out to the river, Jake parked the truck and opened the passenger door. Max didn't jump down immediately. He stood there for a moment, staring at Jake with soft, tired eyes. And Jake knew. The next morning, they visited the vet. The news wasn't unexpected. Age had caught up to Max faster than Jake had dared admit. The joints were weakening, the heart slowing, the once powerful muscles giving way to time's gentle but relentless pull. The vet spoke kindly, explaining options, treatments to ease the discomfort, ways to stretch the good days as long as possible. Jake nodded, listened carefully. He wasn't afraid of the end. He had seen too many endings to fear them anymore. But he was afraid of Max hurting. He made a promise to himself, standing there with one hand resting on Max's thick ruff of fur. Max would never feel abandoned again. He would be loved, cared for, honored, all the way to the last breath. That night, Jake built a second ramp, one even gentler than before, leading from the back porch down into the yard where Max loved to roam. He bought a softer bed, placed it beside the fireplace. He stayed up late rubbing Max's shoulders, whispering stories about old missions, about the silly things Max used to do, about a time when a soldier and his dog could take on the whole world. Max listened, eyes half closed, tail tapping the floor now and then in soft, slow rhythm. Spring turned to summer again. The world outside bloomed, while inside, the world Jake and Max had built grew smaller, quieter, but no less full. Neighbors stopped by often, leaving treats, scratching Max behind the ears, thanking him. Not with words necessarily, but with gestures, small and full of meaning. They knew. Everyone knew. Heroes didn't always walk on two legs. Some had four, and a heartbeat so big it could carry two souls through a lifetime. One golden afternoon, Jake loaded Max gently into the truck and drove to Raven's Rest, the park he had helped fund in honor of war dogs everywhere. Max sat on the grass by the memorial stone, looking out over the open field where other dogs ran and played. Jake sat beside him, hand resting on his old friend's back. They stayed there a long time. Jake talked softly, not because he thought Max needed to hear words, but because he knew the sound of his voice was a comfort. It always had been. "You did good, buddy," he said. "You did more than good. You carried me home." Max lifted his head slightly, leaning against Jake's side. And in that perfect, quiet moment, Jake felt something inside settle. No fear, no regret, only gratitude. Pure, shining, blinding gratitude for every single second they had been given. When they returned home, Jake carried Max inside, careful, patient. He set him down on the soft bed by the fireplace. Max sighed, a sound deep and content. Jake sat down beside him, one hand resting on his chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm. That night, the stars seemed closer, brighter somehow. Jake stayed awake, watching Max breathe, counting every rise and fall like precious coins. And when morning came with its soft, gray light spilling through the curtains, Max was still there, still breathing, still fighting, still home. Days blurred together after that. Some good, some harder. But always Jake stayed close. He turned down work, turned off his phone, canceled everything that wasn't this. Nothing mattered more. On a morning in early fall, when the leaves were just beginning to blush red at the tips, Jake woke to find Max sitting up, staring at him. Eyes clear, alert, like he had something to say. Jake smiled and reached out. Max leaned forward and touched his nose to Jake's hand. One slow, deliberate movement. Then he lay down again, resting his head against Jake's foot. Jake didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there. Together. The hours passed. The world turned. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, Max slipped away. Quietly. Gently. Without fear. Without pain. Jake stayed long after, sitting on the floor, hand resting on Max's back, tears falling freely but without bitterness. He buried Max beneath the oak tree in the backyard, the one they had sat under so many times. He carved a small marker himself, simple and honest. "Max, Loyalty never forgets. In the years that followed, Jake found ways to honor him. He volunteered at veteran centers. He spoke at small gatherings about K-9 soldiers and the unseen battles they fought long after the guns fell silent. But most of all, he lived. Fully. Bravely. Because that's what Max had fought for. That's what Max had taught him. Even in his final lesson. That love doesn't vanish with time. It becomes part of you. It leads you home. And every time Jake walked past the oak tree in the backyard, he smiled. Because somewhere deep inside, he still felt it. The warm press of a nose against his hand. The steady, faithful heartbeat at his side. The memory that, no matter how many years passed, had never truly faded.